Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, my name is Mayce El Mostafa, board member of the MIT Arab Alumni Association, a volunteer-run association that was established to connect MIT and the Arab world and create a space for alumni to collaborate. Welcome to our inaugural program of series of webinars featuring experts from various fields. Today, we are joined by some esteemed faculty and professionals who will shed some light on the impact of COVID on education and share the measures being taken by their institutions. The webinar will last for an hour. I will begin by introducing our speakers, followed by some questions for them to answer. Finally, we will close out with a Q&A session. Please write your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Noting that there will be no voice participation, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Nafez Dakkak. Nafez is the Executive Chairman of IDRAK and the CEO of the Queen Rania Foundation's London office, where he oversees the foundation's strategic partnerships and talent development. He also leads the foundation engagement with the education entrepreneurship sector across MENA and globally. Nafez founded idrak.org, the largest Arabic online education portal that reaches almost 3.5 million learners across the MENA region. Idrak's learners come from all across the region and include disadvantaged youth in Gaza, Syria, and Iraq. Next, we will have Dean Hani Asfour. He is the Dean of Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation. He's an MIT and Harvard trained architect with over 22 years of experience as a practicing architect, designer, and educator, having taught architecture and design in the US, Lebanon, and the UAE. Asfour was recently named one of the 45 most influential architects in MENA by Middle East Architect magazine, where he also won the 2017 award for Best Cultural Building. And finally, we will have Muneerah Alrabe, a faculty member teaching design, history, and theory of architecture at Kuwait University's College of Architecture. She earned a Master's of Science of Architecture in the Aga Khan program for Islamic Architecture at MIT and has professional experience in the field of architecture and design in Germany, United States, and Kuwait. We will begin with Nafez. Nafez, you've been a strong proponent of online education and its champion in the Middle East for the last 10 years. Meanwhile, the pandemic has brought to light the importance of distance learning. What are your thoughts on this? How does this position your institution and what challenges will be faced in the future?
Thank you so much, Mace. Thank you, everybody who's here with us today. As you said, Yanni, maybe one of the few silver linings from COVID-19 is it's forced us to explore different models and modes of learning, working, and life in general. I think one of the things I want to start with is what do we think this means going forward? And I think there are a lot of lessons learned, but I'll probably focus or start with three. Like you said, we've been talking about the importance of online and distance learning for the region for some time now. And I think one of the things that COVID-19 has proved is that, distance and online learning are going to be part and parcel of any modern education system going forward. It's no longer optional. Of course, I'm not saying, after sort of, inshallah, this crisis is over that, learning is all going to be online or virtual, but we're relatively confident that this is going to be part and parcel of any system, and that there are going to be negatives and positives to that. I think, if I'm an average student, this probably means there are going to be no more snow days on a very, just pedestrian level. If I'm a teacher or an instructor, it does mean that I probably need to spend more time developing and mastering some of these pedagogies, and I need my institution to support me. Which brings me to my next point. I think the transition from offline to online, we need to be honest and saying it hasn't been smooth for everybody. It's not been sort of a walk in the park. It hasn't been a piece of cake, whatever we want to call it. And I think that goes to the fact that it's not just a simple copy paste. You can't just take whatever you were doing offline and suddenly just put it into a Zoom call. And I think almost every sort of Zoom call I've participated in, even internally as a team, we always have connectivity issues. We're always struggling and trying to do things. So imagine trying to do that when you're trying to teach a class of 30 to 20 people, and then sometimes obviously more in certain scenarios. I think is going to be become a lot more important to continue to support and invest in teacher training and make sure that teachers are empowered to take this forward. I think the last part of this that's very important is, this crisis, like many other crises before, has not affected everybody the same way. Unfortunately, like many other crises, those that are already disadvantaged with the system have been further and more affected by this crisis. And I think that's something that's going to be very important for us to pay attention to. This whole concept that's been talked about for some years now of, universal basic internet, just making sure that people have basic access to an internet connection to access basic services or essential services like healthcare and education is going to become much more discussed, or at least some sort of emergency response mechanism for that to happen. And I think, maybe this allows me to segue into, what has this meant for us as Idrak? We've been sort of proud to have been very actively involved with the Ministry of Education in supporting the development and launch of the Dakkak platform, which was Georgian's national response. And specifically here, I think, one of the defining features for us for the platform was working with different telecom providers in Jordan to make sure that the platform is freely accessible and open to any of their subscribers. So if you have an existing mobile connection in Jordan, making sure that you're not paying or incurring any data costs from continuing your learning process. Taking a wider lens, I'd say, beyond, just the K-12 space. For us at Idrak, as you said, we're a little over 3.5 million learners around there at this point. And almost 700,000 of these learners have joined Idrak since the crisis started. So we've had almost a 400% increase on sort of a monthly basis in terms of enrollments, and that's translated into other metrics as well. Just talking about the size of the crisis, but most inspiring for us really is just seeing how much people in the region are hungry and excited about content that's customized and tailor-made for them in their language, and that's directly addressing and focusing on their daily needs. I think I'll end here. I can talk a bit more about sort of what we've been doing at Idrak and QRF, but I'll maybe better leave that to the Q&A.
Thank you,
Unless you want me to talk about the challenges now, but you let me know. Ian. I want to just make sure I'm not rambling on.
I think if we want, we can move on to Dean Hani, and then maybe during the Q&A session, we can elaborate more about it and what you have been doing. Thank you very much. We'll be moving to the United Arab Emirates with Dean Hani. Hani, you're working at an institution that has collaboration, human interaction, and physical attendance at the core of its function. Can you please give us some insight into the institution and how your organization has been affected? Hani, you're on mute. It's one of the things you were talking about.
I prepared some slides, so I'm going to share my screen and I'll walk you through them. I won't be long, I promise. They won't be boring, I promise also.
Nice. Very nice.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about what did the IDI do to answer your question, Mayce. Thank you so much for hosting me. I'm very excited to be amongst alumni and friends and colleagues. Basically, the IDI was founded 2 years ago, 2018. We're in our second year. And as many of you know, probably know, the MIT is one of our curriculum partners. We built the program closely with the MIT School of Architecture and Planning and with a new school in Parsons, because MIT doesn't have fashion. I think that's a good thing. But anyway, so we went to Parsons to get the program. They are good universities. And we are a school of design and innovation, not just design and not just innovation together. The key thing is our hybrid approach to education. Our DNA is basically made of 3 basic things that we teach all the students, which is learning to be designers through visual literacy, learning to be to understand engineers through technological fluency, and understand business people through strategic proficiency. We combine all of them, and we have the 4 C's. And every course, students learn how to conceptualize, how to communicate, how to craft, which is the art of making, and how to care, which is the sustainable and empathetic approach to humans and the planet. So everything we try to solve, it has to have a particular caring component. We offer 4 disciplines of design: product design, multimedia design, fashion design, and strategic design management. These are the 4 that we picked because these are the things that are missing in the MENA region, at least at a higher level and at the level that we think would be helpful to prepare the next generation. We actually did a lot of studies understanding the future of jobs, and we discovered that if students are actually able to combine 2 disciplines together, they'll be better prepared for the future. So after the first year, students have to pick 2 of our disciplines, and you will see that they get closer to the skills needed in the future. So I won't dwell into that. I'll just give you an idea. So we offer 6 different pathways for the students, which is the outer circle, which is a combination between things. We know as MIT graduates that innovation happens when you collaborate, and that's something Mayce talked about. So students from day one learn the power of collaboration and, more importantly, blurring boundaries between disciplines. Hopefully they chuck out disciplines out the window, so no more silo thinking. This is a typical environment. The students are very hands-on, and from day one, they learn about electronics and combining it with design and combining it with strategic thinking. So here you can see a first-year student working with Arduino, working with laser cutting, working with hand tools, etc. So it's a very much a hands-on design approach. We have incredible results in the first 2 years. I can show you later, but today I want to focus on Mayce's question. I think I strongly believe that higher education is in a crisis mode, and if you see my video, you can see here on my desk, I'm reading this MIT Press book about MOOCs, which is one of the future things that the COVID-19 quarantine actually accelerated. So now we are all going to that, and Nafez talked about that as well. And so in the first few weeks of the pandemic, we sat down as a team online, and we asked ourselves, after this is over, what did we do? And as we always are thinking in terms of the student-centric, we place the student in the middle, and we talk to our students. And we ask them, what do you want to do? What can we do as a school? What was interesting is that we discovered that there are 3 different pathways that the students chose. And this was a surprise to me because I thought everyone wanted to contribute. Because wherever we go, everyone's doing hackathons and doing all sorts of things. And it was interesting that half the population of our students, we have 80 students, basically said, you know what, I don't want to be disrupted. I'm already stressed enough. I just want continuity. I just want to keep plugging away at what I was doing. And this is what you see on the left of the screen. This is the section A. And then the second half basically said, you know what, I'm not inspired. What's the point of going to school if we can't help the others? So this is a historic moment. We need to be helping others. And the school is pretty much divided 50-50, and even the faculty took 2 different positions, which was very interesting. And that's why it's important to empathize and listen to your audience as you know, as design teaches us. And so we discovered 2 different pathways. And the third pathway were those who were saying, we want to help the community, but not necessarily through the school. So that's why we have the 3 different pathways. So let's look at the A section, which is on the left, upper left, A1. So the students who wanted to see continuity were saying basically, I don't want to lose the work I've done so far in the semester. I don't want to be distracted by anything. I'm already distracted. And we need to approach the pandemic in an intelligent way. So this is very important. This to me was a beautiful lesson from the students and the faculty. So A1 is basically, let's continue what we're doing, continue working on our current projects to complete the curriculum as planned. We need to survive and we need to be resilient. At the same time, we don't know all the requirements that are required for us to do that, so let me stay focused. The second group said, well, of course, now we're studying remotely, so what we want is basically to learn the digital skills. And basically, we'll focus on the manual skills later when we go back to the lab. This was particularly essential in the fashion studios because, you know, they don't have the machines or things like that. I'll explain on the right how we solved that problem. And then design by inhabiting was basically live through this moment through self-reflection. And hopefully we'll have a better understanding of it, which leads to the fourth one, is that there's a group actively collecting data, trying to understand what this pandemic really is, because there's so much news and so much we don't know. Those are the wise ones who want to basically say, let's collect data so later we can do projects for the pandemic once we know what this is all about. We don't want to be doing a knee-jerk type reaction. On the right, you have students who are saying, it just doesn't make sense to continue doing what we're doing. We can't, you know, put our head in the sand. We need to come up with something. Helping others will motivate me. What's the point of doing design if we're not helping others? People felt urgently that they needed to make changes. And so there are 3 initiatives on this part. The Agile Factory is converting a studio, a workshop, and a lecture, and combining the students into projects that solve problems for the pandemic. They joined a hackathon to create shields. They did other activities resolved around helping the health community because we have a strong relationship with the medical school here. And the second thing is that we made our Fab Lab completely remotely accessible. So we got permission from the Ministry of Education to have our Fab Lab assistants go alternating days, so they're never there at the same time. They run the machines. Students have remote access to them. We installed cameras and students can watch their work. We made a deal with Kareem so we can deliver things, and with Fetcher so we can deliver the products to the students in the same day. And if they're overseas, of course, it takes more time. We have 5 students who went back to their homes. And then the last one is to take a project from their current project, from their current studio, and change the program so it's related to COVID. So they come up with a solution that they want. So you have it happening at different levels. And the community one is basically joining other task force hackathons or finding ways to help your community. And at the bottom is the faculty commitment that our goal is not to compromise the standard that we want to deliver, which is the MIT standard. We want to actually deliver the learning outcomes that we set out to do. We keep the calendar as it is, and we also empathize with the students. We converted voluntarily all the grades pass fail. So if students choose to make them pass fail, so no one's going to fail this semester. So that eases the pressure off of them as long as they attended the classes. So that's basically our approach, Mayce.
Thank you very much. So now I'll leave the questions for later. If you have any questions for Hani or for Nafez, please put them on. I'll now move into, we'll move to Kuwait with Muneerah. Muneerah, Kuwait was always an avid believer in the power of education, but also trusts that if it should be done in classrooms. This is founded on the belief of a certain richness in face-to-face interaction and human collaboration. As such, not enough attention was placed on digitizing the education sector. What measures has your institution taken to bridge this gap, and how is it being implemented in your field of architecture?
Okay, thank you, Mayce. So I'm going to show you a different side of the story, where here in Kuwait, the equation is a bit different. The biggest challenge we face right now is the recognition issue. Basically, our main issue is that online course certificates and trainings are not recognized by our governments. And some employers also, they don't accept any sort of online training or online certificates, for example. That's the biggest hurdle we're facing right now. And I work in a public university, and the public university hosts around 40,000 students. So it's a large number of students. And ever since the official announcement of public holiday due to COVID-19 by the Council of Ministers, we've been stalled. Our education has stopped. Unfortunately, we cannot teach online, although we have all the means. we use the digital tools every day in our classroom, but that we can't teach because basically it's the lack of leadership. The issue here is very clear. The crisis here is a wake-up call to our institution and to the whole governmental structure. It exposed the gaps and the missing, it exposed a lot of issues. And I think the biggest issue is the lack of leadership in the society, or this framework, the governmental framework, and the lack of recognition of any online training format whatsoever. I know it's different with you, Mayce. I think you can talk more, maybe you can help me with this conversation here in Kuwait about the private sector. But with the public sector here, it's different. Our client goes back to the government, so we have to abide by government laws. Now, knowing that other universities, for example, have already taught online, I think there are three main factors before we jump into this digitizing the educational sector. I think there are three main factors that need to be present, specifically in Kuwait and Kuwait culture. First, assuming that the technology is there, we have to assume that the students are willing to learn. Without the students' will, there's no point in moving, right? The second one is assuming the teachers are willing and able to teach online. And lastly, assuming that the institutional and government is supportive. I think this is the biggest issue here. Now, every day in our everyday classroom, we implement online tools. We use the Microsoft Teams. We use a lot of different local online platforms like MyU. There's a lot of different ones available to our students, but these are used mostly for the social side of it. But we use a lot of the Microsoft Teams, the Google Suites, and the platforms are endless. So I don't think it's a technological issue in my case, in my experience. I think it's more of a structural framework. So I think the biggest challenge, again, with moving to distant learning is to really pressure the government to regulate and approve this move to online learning. And with that, we have to understand that there are different aspects that we need to take into consideration. I think for me as a faculty member, it's very important to find the right balance, between synchronous and asynchronous methods of teaching, meaning how you deal with people online is completely different than face-to-face. And we're actually doing right now some training courses through the university on how to deal with that jump. But that's for general. However, in my case, you have to understand that you have to think about the type of class you'll be teaching. Architecture schools are taught in a completely different way. You have to understand the number of students you have. I have around 30 to 40 students in my studio, which is a pretty large number. Again, we are the only College of Architecture here in Kuwait, so we have a high demand of students, and the student-faculty ratio is a bit different. And then going back to the nature of our field, specifically the architectural studio, is something that really incorporates studio culture. And if people are not familiar with studio culture, it's the key driver for a creative working environment. It's a place where we create a space for all the students to collaborate and work together and support each other. It's a space for encouragement, engagement, and support. And it's a different approach in terms of, for example, I can be working at home remotely on my project, and I can come up with a solution, right, with a project. But then if I'm in studio, I can come up with a completely different, much more enhanced end result because of the physical interaction between all the students. And the learning, again, for me, I strongly believe in peer-to-peer education interaction, especially again in the creative field. It's completely different. You can learn all the technological or digital tools on your own, but when you're actually creatively thinking, design solving, you need to be around different minds and think about the same challenges together. The second issue we also faced here is the work-life balance. Suddenly we have parents who are now teachers, have to take care of their kids. They're also working at home, and they're doing all these Zoom calls all the time, but also trying to be teachers. So it's something that happens because of this sudden jump into digitizing the educational sector. And I think in the future, we need to just, realize that there are certain responsibilities and certain timeframes for each things. And how do you kind of evaluate these, and how do you work with this balance? And then also comes the engagement. How do you engage students in discussion? A lot of our classrooms are debates, and we have a lot of back and forth, and it becomes physical, and it's emotional. So it really enhances their way of thinking. But then if you move into online discussions, you see that there's a lack of engagement from the students themselves. And also regulation. How do you regulate student examination online? I'd like to talk about that later with Nafez. Maybe that'll be more interesting. But how do you trust students, or how do you, in a society where there's a lot of cheating, a lot of things happening, how do you regulate that when they're online and they're away and there's no proctor, basically? And again, if we do move to digitizing the educational sector, I think we have to really change our expectations. I think we need to reframe the way we teach, and especially with hands-on classes. So I teach a lot of first-year students, foundation students, where again, our approach, our educational approach in the university right now is a very traditional approach. First year is all hands-on, hand drawing, hand modeling. They don't start to draw on the computer or use the computer until the second year. So how do we start to see that shift if we start to digitize, especially within the foundation years, right? And I wonder, what are other methodological approaches people have explored? And I think, Hani, maybe you can talk more about that later on. Especially with, there's a lot of VR and AR and AI coming up, and the technology is like, it's really expanding so fast. So there's a lot of opportunities also that come when we move to the digitizing sector, digitizing the educational sector. I think the opportunities are endless, because first, now your learners can be anyone, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of their class. You start to open up education to all, which is fantastic. But the only thing we have to consider is the access to technology, and not everyone has access to technology. So how do we go about dealing with that? And then also another great opportunity that comes with going online is we can do this, right? Where we can really reach to a wider audience from all around. I can imagine having our final reviews with, Hani in Dubai, people from MIT, people from New York, and become all in one online platform, which is fantastic. And you can start to really expose your students to way bigger limits, and become limitless, basically. And I think the biggest opportunity that comes with digitizing education is what you talked about earlier. I mean, I'm an avid believer in multidisciplinarity, and I think it's a great, and once we move online, we can also start to really open up the discourse to not just within the field, but really start to collaborate across. And there are so many people doing it right now. I mean, Didi and Bay are starting to do that, right? And the MIT Media Lab starts to take this and really run with it. And you asked about the implementation of technology, right? Yeah, how do you implement, how is it being implemented in your field of architecture? So the field of architecture is currently dependent on digital tools and digital technologies, from machine learning to fabrication technologies, from artificial intelligence to big data. We have, I mean, every day we use 3D and CAD softwares, BIM softwares. If people are not familiar with those, these are just computer-aided design softwares and building information modeling softwares, which kind of calculate a lot of things and help in the design process. And also I can see the future of really incorporating VR and virtual reality. And there's a lot of tools online that are available. For example, the Microsoft HoloLens, where you can just wear your glasses and you can start to, basically what it does is it uses optics and sensors to deliver 3D holograms that are pinned to real world. So you can start to really use that as a guide to help with construction, within the field itself, but also in education when you start to move into design build courses, right? How do you deal with that? So maybe incorporating VR and AR technologies can really push this degree of education. And again, it's rare that an architectural project not use any digital tools. We're highly dependent on that. But again, we face a lot of issues with education, because in the field is different than, there's a big gap between the way architecture schools are being run and the way architecture practices are actually happening. So I think this gap really needs to be, it needs to come together and start to realize, okay, how do we start to connect these using technology? And perhaps, moving online can actually help that. And in conclusion, I think, again, COVID-19 was really a wake-up call. Right now, they've announced officially March 1st was the official announcement of the public holiday due to COVID. And then they announced that we will resume our education in August. So that means we are staying at home for 5 months. My students are staying at home for 5 months with absolutely no way of, continuing education with me. But I mean, I've constantly been in contact with them, sending them tutorials. There's so many things and so many resources online that you can really use. For me as an instructor, I think it's a lost opportunity, but it also allows you to understand that, you don't really need the classroom to learn. There's a lot of opportunities happening online. But at the same time, again, we're talking about architecture here. And when we talk about architecture and the architectural education, it's the physicality of the space is essential to our learning, because it is the medium of our study, right? So I think, again, I don't think I keep talking about architecture education. I don't think we can solely move to digitizing the educational sector in architecture. However, I think the physicality of the space itself is very important. I mean, I can see a future where, let's say, there are no campuses, but there are these decentralized labs, decentralized areas where, people can start to access tools and digital equipment that they don't have access to. And finally, again, looking at the bright side, there's a lot of technology, but the biggest issue is investing in design education. Investing in design education is close to nothing. Here in our region, I think DD is the first kind of design institute to actually come up, and that only happened a few years ago. So that's something new, and I want to see how we can really, have a strong leadership in funding and investing in design education. And I'll stop here, and maybe we'll continue later in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Muneerah. We're going to actually move to the Q&A now. Very interesting 3 speakers that have a wide spectrum. We went from a complete online implementation of education to a new way to implement it online, to another specter that is trying to digitize itself. The first question comes and goes to Nafez. What measures are being taken to reach marginalized communities like refugees who don't have devices or connectivity? As you may know, the MENA region is a region that is not, that doesn't have connectivity all the time. Hardware is not available. So how has IDRAK been actually dealing with these disparities? As you said, you reach communities in Gaza, Iraq, and Syria. So can you please answer that? You're on mute, Nafez. Technology.
Thank you for that question. I mean, I think so. pre-COVID, we've been conscious on that, and we talked about that a lot. We talk a lot about sort of, the four C's of, delivering education. You think about, the cost, the connectivity, the currency of the degree, and of course the content itself. And I think, each one of these aspects of the framework are really important when you're trying to reach, especially, vulnerable populations. For Idrak, specifically, I'd say in the refugee camps, we've always delivered through partners. So whenever we've delivered content, it's actually really been championed by, great people like the Norwegian Refugee Council, UNHCR, CARE, and others that have delivered the content in camps, and they usually supplement it with, the needed access to devices and internet. And I'd say, for camps, I think that's incredibly important. And one aspect that I would say is important to highlight here is just being connected to the internet does not mean you can learn online. I'd say, we've learned that the hard way, especially in, vulnerable populations. We've seen, people have a smartphone, they're connected to Facebook, they use WhatsApp, but really, and sometimes I'd say, unfortunately, that is the extent of the internet to them. It's effectively owned by Facebook or Mr. Zuckerberg, which is, again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it means, they really need the digital literacy to move beyond that. How do they use an email? How do they search on different platforms and learn online? And I think that part of the connectivity aspect is important. Obviously, I mean, there are other examples, beyond Idrak and outside of Jordan and the region. The Teaching Without Internet Alliance has, put a lot of content out there specifically for these populations. They've recently put out a paper on that, and I'd be happy to sort of share the paper with anybody that's interesting. Specifically discusses, how do you work in areas where there's little to no internet in terms of distributing teaching packets, paper packets, and other tools.
Thank you very much, Nafez. And just as a follow-up to that, have you seen those? Have you applied these to any elementary or in secondary education?
Sure. So I mean, Idrak, most of the content on Idrak, I'd say when Idrak was founded, was really focused on higher education. But working with partners like the Jack Ma Foundation and others, we've expanded our content library to include content and curriculum for K-12, specifically in math and English for now. That's aligned with the national curricula of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. That's relatively been sort of very successful. It's been, I'd say, one of our biggest contributions to Darsek as a platform here in Jordan, but also across the region. It does become harder, though, I'd say, for younger age populations. Once you want to implement technology, you need to make sure that you involve parents appropriately and that they have the right scaffolding to support their children through that.
Thank you very much, Nafez. Our next one goes to Hani. Hani, do you have any collaboration with MIT now, COVID related? Please unmute. We're having trouble with that today. Hani.
Okay, yeah. No, we don't. We don't have. We were planning an IAP program with MIT over the winter break, and another one in the summer. But with COVID, no, we haven't had anything. Although, Hashim Serkis and I are in touch, but we haven't been able to do it.
Okay, and
but
another.
We have with local universities. We have a couple with local universities. So if that helps, yeah.
Okay, another one is the DD framework is quite impressive and proactive. Is it more of a short-term approach, or is it sustainable in the medium and long term?
I don't know. Faris, thank you for the question. Great to see you here. Is the question for the framework in general, or is it the framework that we're using with COVID?
I think
if it's
general.
So in general. Is it sustainable? Yeah, sustainable and scalable. Now we're considering adding one more discipline. So then the output would be 10 possible, what's the word I'm looking for? Combinations. Is it sustainable in the sense, it is evolving. For instance, multimedia we're going to shift it towards more AI from now on and away from graphic design and that because we're seeing a lot of growth in AI and there's a lot of interest. And fashion, we're going into sustainable fashion, which is from the beginning has been the case. And then we're considering, so I won't go into all the details, but it's really actually very flexible because they're components that you can move around. The thing is, though, we can't change anything before our 5th year. We're only in our 2nd year because we need to get reaccredited based on what we offered, and we cannot change anything. That's one of the constraints that drives me crazy because I really want this to evolve faster, but we have to be respectful of the process.
And if we talk about your COVID framework, is that sustainable?
Ask me in 2 weeks. We're still assessing it. We'll be done with the semester in 2 weeks. Then we're going to do a proper assessment. As we were doing it, there were complaints that, it was imbalanced, and, people are never completely satisfied. At the same time, we're receiving great feedback. We're collecting all the feedback. And then in 2 weeks, I'll have a more informed answer. But so far, it's been terrific. We entered the hackathon. We were finalists, the students. So that was exciting for them. We didn't win, but they made it that far. That was exciting.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Hopefully it works out and it becomes sustainable.
I hope so. Yeah.
This is a question for all 3 of you, and feel free to jump in. Students and institutions have different goals. How does social distance address these different objectives? Example, credentials and information versus instilling values and attitudes. Who would like to answer that? So basically, it's talking about the difference in values between students and their institutions. Institutions have values and strategic objectives and things they want to instill in their students, whereas students have their own beliefs and their own objectives of learning, and that's why they go to a certain institution and not the other. So how does social distancing address these different issues?
Go ahead.
No, please. You're a dean of an institution, so you probably have a more valuable perspective.
I just have an anecdote from today's faculty meeting. Because we were sharing, we did advisement online with the students, and a lot of them confided to their advisors that if we continue next semester in quarantine, they're going to take a year off. So a majority of students don't want to continue this way. A lot of them miss university, and as Muneerah was talking, we're a design school. This open collaboration, seeing, learning by looking, learning by listening, receiving feedback from your peers, that's very important. So if the majority of students want to take a year off, if we continue in this way, it's a crisis for us. We have to think about how to do it. So the most important thing to answer the question is to keep listening and being sincerely student-centered. We listen to the students, we talk to them. It's not pampering or giving them what they want. We're literally listening to what they are saying and literally reacting. We are still small, we are still agile. We're only 9 faculty members, so we can easily adapt and understand. And this is something I want us to keep as we scale. This is one of my big challenges. So it's very important to be adaptive and responsive to the students and get those goals aligned.
Nafez, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's hard to give a comprehensive answer because, as Dr. Hani alluded, different people have different goals, and different institutions provide you sort of a pathway to sort of a different goal as well. But I will say, one of the things that COVID-19 has definitely done, I'd say, is maybe expose some of those gaps, and by exposing them, help us to better align and understand them. And that really differs also per what segment or sector of the education system you're talking about. So I think one of the things our region suffers from quite a bit is rote learning and memorization, maybe specifically at the K-12 level. It is almost impossible to get a 5th grader to do something you don't want them to do if they're not sitting with you in the same classroom. And I think we've all had even maybe as students ourselves asked, why am I learning this? Why am I learning this? Just because it's on the exam. And once you transition online, you really need to start thinking about, how do I make this more meaningful, more relevant, and just more obviously helpful to students in their day-to-day lives. And I think that sort of fracture or sort of highlighting that fracture between the goals and aims of students and the education system is actually a good thing, and it will push us in the right direction. Again, it's not going to be overnight. As Dr. Hani said, we need to continue listening to the students and adapting to them. I think maybe as a Ministry of Education in any Arab country, they're probably a lot less lean and responsive than Didi, but I think we're on the right path.
As a follow-up to what you just said, sorry, Munir, do you want to say something regarding that?
I mean, there's also an opportunity here. If you do move to digitizing the educational sector, you can start to create those streams, right? I mean, then you can really filter the students who actually want to learn and those who are just, being forced by society and family and all of that. So I mean, there's an opportunity there to really create the streams that you're talking about, Dr. Hani, in your institute, right? Where you can choose which path you want to take. And I think if you start to open up different platforms online, you can start to see students accelerating in those versus being held back by other students or other. So you can start to see acceleration. You can start to work with, smart, faster learners and slower paced learners, and you can start to divide them in this way where it's not too obvious when it's in the classroom. So that's just what I wanted to add.
As a follow-up to that, do you feel that COVID has helped level the playing field between the regarding education globally, or does it widen the disparities?
I mean, I would say it definitely widens the disparity, unfortunately. I mean, I think, between resource-rich and resource-poor areas, as I said in my opening remarks, I think, like many crises, it's the people that are already disadvantaged that get affected more. And again, we're all from, all the panelists, gone to MIT, or I went to maybe a lesser known institution, but, I think we're all very privileged here. And I think it's important to realize that when you talk about most people around the 1.3 billion learners affected by this, most of them don't have regular access to the internet. They're not going to a top tier academic institution in the US. I recently saw reports saying in places like sub-Saharan Africa, connectivity in the schools is less than 20%. So you have 80% of people that have been majorly affected. So I'd say definitely broaden the gap.
And do you feel, how can we tailor the online education to fit more towards the region, like the MENA region and the Arab world?
So I mean, so on that, I'd say, so investing more and more in connectivity is going to be very important. I think, in places like Jordan and maybe the GCC connectivity is relatively good. Obviously, I think, certain parts of Jordan, it needs to improve as well. But if you go to the larger region, there's still some way to go in terms of connectivity to the internet. But again, that's definitely improving. The second thing I think is really, no education system, whether online or offline, is going to be better than the quality of its teachers. And I think, that's one thing that we strongly believe in across the entire, Queen Rania Foundation portfolio. And, through the Queen Rania Teachers Academy, we've invested quite a bit in. So I think, training teachers, enabling them and empowering them to teach online and use these digital tools is very important. Because at the end of the day, I think, the tools can be, replaced, they can change, but the teacher will remain, central and a big part of this process, even with, any developments in, machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc. And I would say, and I'd end on, if anything, the COVID crisis has even made it more important or shown just how important that relationship between teacher and student is to overcome this crisis. And it's, teachers that have invested in building strong relationships with their students are the ones that have been able to help them get through this, because obviously, this has been a mentally and, on multiple levels, difficult time for a lot of households.
Thank you, Nafez. Hani, there's a question that says, given that MOOC classes are quite different from presential ones, what do you recommend to make them more effective and motivating?
The beautiful thing about having to learn suddenly how to use online learning, and I speak from experience, is actually doing multimodal teaching. And we introduced a lot of tools like, I don't want to advertise them, but like Menti or Miro or other different tools online. And the feedback of the students was terrific because they want more activities like that, because then they stay attentive. Now, all of our courses are visual. So it's not, someone droning on and talking without visuals and etc. So what we've learned is that we knew this already, but we needed to change our mode of learning. Now we were forced to do it, which is to teach them in little chunks and do exercises to reinforce the learning. And this is common in online learning. I mean, if you know Harvard X or MIT, also their courses are done in that way. So we need to restructure our information and not tone it down, just restructure it, find a different way to keep them engaged. Imagine you're watching a video for an hour and a half. No one does that anymore unless it's entertainment, right? For educational, you need to do check-ins to keep them engaged. So I would say we have a lot to learn.
Very good, thank you. And there's a question for Muneerah that says, what happened to the project Diana, free MIT online content? Could that be useful to bypass the lack of approved online courses in Kuwait?
Yes, I mean, I've given my students access to, I mean, they're all free and they're accessible to everyone. So I've given them these specific resources, and the edX has a great variety, and the Harvard GSD, also the MIT courses are also all available online. So I've sent them all of these resources. It doesn't, it gives them access to these resources. Again, as I said, they can access a lot of different information, but how do they apply them is something that they have to do on their own, unless they come to me, which I would love to. But again, it needs the willingness of the student to actually, take that initiative. So.
Thank you. Hopefully there'll be more appealing online courses and they'll be more engaged with them. There is a question that's to all three of you. How do you think each of your institutions would change its pedagogical approach post-pandemic, and how will your personal teaching approach change?
Yeah, I mean, anyway, I just answered that we really need to accelerate the learning. We were learning at the same time. Now we have accelerated that learning. Definitely, how the biggest challenge, which is what Muneerah focused on, is how do you teach hands-on learning, and how do you teach collaborative learning online? And I think there are tools that are helping. I think Miro is a very good tool if you haven't used it for collaborative co-creation, but it's not for 3D printing or objects. It's more two-dimensional posters. Right? So we have professors who want to create their own tools. So we will see what will happen, but it's really giving us an opportunity, I think.
A follow-up to that would be, do you think that forced digital transformation will help bring more recognition to online degrees?
It depends. I mean, again, for us, it's if you start to really push and pressure the government and show the value and show them, I mean, maybe it has to come down to money, right? Maybe you can show them like, if you start to do this, you'll cut costs, you'll do this, it's better for everyone, then people will accept it. So I don't know if force is the right term to be used, but I think definitely the pressure needs to happen. And again, with the pressure comes a lot of different things: regulation, balance, and engagement, and all of
that. And what are concrete measures to protect the privacy of the students with all this digitalization? Nafez, maybe you can ask that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think so. Idrak is GDPR compliant. We obviously, I guess, through our platform, serve a lot of Syrian refugees in Germany and sort of across Europe. So we are GDPR compliant. I think, that's an extensive framework. I mean, I'd say maybe in certain quarters, certainly in the US, maybe people would argue it's excessive. But I think, the frameworks are out there, protecting people's identity, only making sure, you collect only the necessary information, being very sensitive about, how you go about educating children under the age of 18. I mean, we do our best to, I'd say, and obviously comply with all of that. I think it gets, again, much more difficult when it comes to younger students and especially students in school. But again, the frameworks are all out there. There is more and more, I'd say, talk now about, how to use, the blockchain to help people, potentially record their sort of credentials and then take them with them and potentially, own them. I'm not an expert in sort of that area, but I'm sure a lot will happen in that sense as well.
Thank you very much. The last question is what about assessment? How do you think assessment of students will vary with all of this digitalization?
Sure. I mean, I think so. One mistake that a lot of people make is falling in love with technology for the sake of technology. At the end of the day, it's really about the learning objectives you have for your classroom, and then based on those learning objectives and outcomes, what kind of skills are you trying to assess. I think there are a lot of tools out there. So in terms of proctoring, virtual and digital proctoring is an option. There are quite a few companies that do this for you if you want people to proctor students while they're taking an exam, and there are also different kinds of proctoring. In general, I'd say one of the things that online learning has made popular again, especially at a large scale, is peer-to-peer assessment and peer learning, which actually ends up having quite a bit of benefit in terms of achieving certain educational objectives. So I'd say, I mean, it's really about what you're trying to assess, certainly, and I think there's no way of denying this. Subjects that are more quantitative, so the hard sciences, are probably easier to assess online right now, but that's not to say there aren't more and more tools to assess creativity, collaboration, and other areas.
Yeah, in our case, we're doing the juries online, so students present their digital work, and we get the jury to sit together, and we can all see them on Zoom like we are seeing each other. So it works pretty well. We don't have any closed book exams at the ITI. It's one of our policies. So they have a take-home exam in the history course, which they take home. It takes 3 weeks to do it. They can collaborate. It's open book, etc. But we're looking for the critical thinking skills. So of course, if they cheated, we have the tools for plagiarism, and you can tell. I mean, we know the students, so we know if they're. But it's really when you encourage them and you empower them, they're not going to cheat. When they realize they don't have to memorize and spit it out, they're not going to cheat because you keep reminding them we're looking for your own ideas. Basically, that's how we're doing it. The ministry asked us, how are you monitoring those exams? And we put not applicable. It was quite funny. They haven't replied yet, but I'm waiting for them to reply with a query.
Very, very creative.
I think, again, sorry, you have to change your learning objectives. If you're moving to a different platform, you have to expect different things. And again, as Dr. Hani mentioned, we have to also rework how we assess. In today's age, history, you don't need to memorize, right? Memorization is not something that you need to do anymore. You can just take your iPhone and just check for any date, right? So, I mean, are examinations even necessary at this time of age? So really moving into critical thinking rather than memorization and delivering what, people have hammered into your brain.
Thank you so much, Muneerah. And sorry for all the questions we haven't answered. We're running out of time. And thank you, Hani. Thank you, Nafez from London and Dubai. Thank you, Muneerah. It was a pleasure hosting this with all of you. From all of us at MIT AAA, stay safe, goodbye, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.